So this is Out of Left Field, episode Who Knows Anymore? Our second election episode, although the election has been essentially going on forever.
You know what was funny? Was a guy from some American newspaper did a piece on the Canadian, the first debate, and he was like, wow, their election is only 11 weeks long. I was like, 11 weeks long? This is the longest election we've had since, like, the 50s. It should be like 4 weeks.
Well, now, hey. If it was 4 weeks long, we'd probably only be looking at a minority in DP government as a possibility.
Well, yeah, the longer it goes on, the more the Conservatives are slowly suffering.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, a lot of people were talking about this, why was it such a long campaign? Why was Stephen Harper dragging it out? And why was it so sudden? I mean, I think he called the election essentially because he was getting hammered by a bunch of non-political groups that were attacking him in the media, like, in ads and things. And I think he was sort of looking at this and saying, well, since we're already running a campaign and I'm kind of hobbled, we might as well just start it now, and I can shut that down and we can get everything nice and orderly. And with the Conservative Party, with more money than everyone else combined, we're just going to roll over everyone else.
Yeah, I think his intention was to outspend people because they with the changes that he put through to how much money you get, for votes and whatnot, and the subsidies to political parties, that favors the Conservatives inherently, right?
Yeah, well,
so he's been stacking the cards in the Conservatives' favor this whole time, and he's been trying to outspend everyone else. And it seems to be slowly blowing up in his face.
Yeah, it's a bit of a slow motion train wreck for the Conservatives, but it's really hard to tell. I mean, we're not gonna really know what happened inside the Conservative Party election until after this election has happened already. Like we can kind of see what's going on with the NDP, the Bloc, the Liberals. We see decisions being made, arguments, problems. Like there's activity. You don't get to be inside the parties really, but you get to sort of see what's happening. With the Conservatives, it's a brick wall.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're not even allowing their MPs to talk to the media or attend like all candidates meetings because, like, Stephen Harper, I'll give him credit. He's smart and he knows that the Canadian public do not agree with conservative principles for the most part, and so the more that he can do to isolate people from what the Conservatives actually think and actually want to do, the better. So it's funny because the whole point of having an election is so that you can put your policies forward to the public to see if they like them or not, and to see if they would. That's the whole point of an election, right?
Yeah. Well,
but the Conservatives say no. Don't talk to the media. Don't say anything. Don't go to the debates. Just.
If anyone asks, read from this prepared statement, but otherwise, say that I have no comment.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's ironic, actually. It seems like before the election, it was constantly on the radio and on TV, advertisements essentially for the quote government, but they were essentially just covers for the Conservative Party.
Right.
And yet now it seems like we're hearing less from the Conservatives during the election than we were then.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because they were constantly going on about like, oh, we're doing this, that, and the other, every possible thing. And it really hasn't gone the way I think Stephen Harper has wanted. But of course, for someone who is that isolated, who knows how separated he is now from reality?
Well, yeah, I mean, all of his executive cabinet have mostly resigned, and he's lost a lot of his incumbents. He's increasingly isolated at the top of his little ivory tower that he's built himself.
It's just the PMO, and that's it. And no one else seems to know what's going on. At all.
Right.
Definitely not the media.
Because they've been so secretive this entire time.
Yeah, like none of the candidates seem to know what their own party's policy is, just that it's amazing.
Yeah, well, I mean, at this point, the Conservatives are in third place. I mean, who knows if it'll stay that way? You never know.
Couple recent polls have said so. I mean, it might have been the most recent or second most recent poll put the NDP in not only first place, but within plausible reach of a majority.
Majority government, yeah.
Yeah, and the Conservatives were in third. That's fairly significant because since the election started, the Liberals have consistently been in third place
Yeah.
the whole time, and the NDP has mostly been in first place, and the Conservatives have mostly been in second. And so for that to shift with the NDP well ahead of the Conservatives, outside of their sort of boundary of possibilities, and the Liberals and Conservatives now vying for second place, it's possible that the Conservatives might have something like a blowout for their seats. I don't really expect a lot of that because it so happens, and I don't think this doesn't really have to do with gerrymandering or anything, but it just so happens that the way the seats are organized and where the support lies, the Conservatives are generally favored for getting more seats, even with a much lower
Yeah, that's the
vote.
thing. The Conservatives could get more seats than the NDP, even if they have like less support. Because the NDP is always the sort of like have 20 to 30% support in most ridings on average, whereas the Conservatives, because of the first past the vote system, because the Conservatives have strong regional support, they easily take those seats because they have 60 support percent in a lot in certain areas.
And in some ridings like ours, they're barely in the teens.
They might as well not even run a candidate here.
Well, as far as I know, they're not. They still haven't. I still haven't heard what's going on with the all candidates meeting here. I don't know if he's going to show up. I don't know who the candidate is. I'll be honest. Like last election, no one really considered the Conservative candidate to be a realistic chance, right? Like it wasn't that likely, but there were signs out. He was there. He kind of was like, he was on the radio. You'd get quotes from him and stuff. The Conservative Party in this riding, what his opinion was on whatever. That's not happening now.
No, I think they're. Stephen Harper actually took the time to go to Edmonton, which was interesting because most of the time the Conservatives don't have to bother going to Alberta at all because it's just a shoe-in.
Well, Edmonton is an NDP stronghold, though.
Just the one tiny little seat there.
Redmonton. Yeah, it's interesting. It's really, really very interesting just how... I mean, it looks like even with first past the post, it looks like on the whole issue of like divided votes and worthless votes in particular ridings might end up coming out in the wash because it looks pretty good as far as everyone having an actual option in their riding. Like, there's a lot of close ridings. There's a lot of ridings that aren't close, but I think on the whole, all three, the Conservatives, the NDP, and the Liberals, are going to get a decent number of seats overall.
Yeah, well, it'll be really interesting to see how it turns out, but it does kind of call into question the whole concept of strategic voting at all. If on average all parties have about 30% support, give or take, then you kind of might as well just vote for the party that you like, unless that party is the Green Party, because they're not going to win. Unless you're in Saanich, I guess.
Well, or our riding, or a couple. There's a few ridings where the Green Party is within. I mean, really, realistically, I mean the way the polls and numbers have been moving around quite a bit. If you're in a riding where the Green Party is within 10% of first place, they're a possible candidate. There's someone you could reasonably support and have a
fair
chance
enough.
with.
Yeah, for sure. That's fine. It is funny to see the whole anyone but Harper. I don't know if you call it a movement, but that sort of sentiment. It's like, well, if the Conservatives are in third place now, then it's
What does that even
definitely
mean?
going to be anyone but Harper.
Yeah, if you're in a riding where it's it's going to be either the NDP, Liberals, or Greens, I guess you're just forced to support whoever. It's even more egregious in Quebec, where the I think the largest or one of the largest labor federations there disaffiliated from the Bloc Québécois because they are completely worthless at this point. And didn't affiliate with the NDP, but took an anything but conservative stance and said, support anyone but the Conservatives, even though in Quebec, the NDP is going to get the vast majority of seats, and on a practical level, it means voting for the NDP, but they didn't actually want to say that.
A labor union.
Yeah, the Quebec Federation, one of the Quebec Federations of
Why
Labor.
the unions historically support the NDP? Why did they not do that?
Well, I mean, in the case of Quebec, the NDP has not until fairly recently ever been very strong in Quebec. The
Right.
labor unions in Quebec generally supported separatist parties because, on a political level, they were more in agreement with what those labor unions actually wanted. But now that the bloc and even the Parti Québécois to some degree is kind of on the skids, it means they're looking to other options. Now the NDP is there and seems like they're there to stay. They're now they've disaffiliated from the bloc. Now maybe after this election they'll affiliate with the NDP. A couple of the member unions have affiliated with the NDP, but realistically it hasn't really changed, and it just seems very strange when you're in a situation like that. And it seems obvious if your argument is vote for the candidate that can defeat the Conservatives. Right now, that means the NDP. And if you're not willing to say that, particularly in Quebec, there seems to be something fundamentally hypocritical about that. Particularly when, and I hate to say this to some degree, but particularly when the people who are voting for the Conservative Party are doing it because they actually believe in something. If the best you can say is, don't vote Conservative, then I'm sorry, but the Conservatives are the ones who deserve to win in that case. They're the only ones who have people who actually support them.
Right.
Really. And when you're taking that kind of policy and you're going out into the wider, public, for those people who don't vote, aren't they right not to vote if all they have is an option between the Conservatives and just not Conservatives? What's the point of voting if the only option is something you don't actually want?
That actually reminds me of back when in the whole BC politics thing, when during the election there were so many things that the NDP could have done to win that election, but all that Carol James said was Liberals are promise breakers. They're promise breakers. They didn't do what they said they do. You shouldn't vote Liberal because they're bad. You should vote for NDP because you can trust us. We're going to do what we say we're going to do. But the only problem was they didn't really say they were going to do anything except not being liberals.
Well, and I will tell you this much. A NDP government, when it gets into power, will fulfill that promise on its first day. On its first the day of its mandate. We will not be liberals.
Yeah, and it's like running up an election in the absence of a platform.
See, that's the kind of stuff, when I think of negative campaigning, that's what I think of. I don't think of mudslinging so much, but this kind of almost apolitical, you don't like these people. Well, that's great, because that's all we care about. You don't need to have opinions on politics. You don't need to think about it. You just need to hate these people for some very specific reasons, and in some cases even real reasons. But, don't actually involve yourself in politics. Just take the easy way out, and we'll do the rest.
Right.
Whoever we are, whoever you happen to vote for, whoever just happens to get in. Because there will come a day, even if it's not this election, there will come a day when the Conservatives aren't in power. There will come a day when Harper is just gone.
Yeah.
If you don't have something of substance for when that happens, they'll just come back again, stronger than before.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, it'll be interesting to see what happens to the Conservatives when Harper's gone.
Oh, yeah.
Because, he runs a pretty tight ship. Speaking of which...
It's a very tight, tiny little rubber boat.
In the middle of the ocean.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope we're not, counting our chickens before they hatch, and that the Conservatives, maybe he has an ace up his sleeve and some dirt on Mulcair, and
we already heard about the dirt on Mulcair.
What was the dirt on
that he
Mulcair?
loves what's her name, Margaret Thatcher, right?
What?
You didn't hear about this?
No.
Oh, it's not really all that surprising, but back when he was a Liberal minister in Quebec,
Right.
there was a speech that's been recorded and was released by someone. We will
Right.
never know who, but it was released, and it was like him in the early 90s, maybe, praising Margaret Thatcher, wings of liberty and liberalism and blah 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 blah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it didn't go over too well, and more than that, I mean, the simplest answer would have been to say, My views have evolved since then. That was like 20 years ago.
Right.
I don't believe that anymore.
What did he say, actually?
He just kind of hand-waved it as like, well, liberty's good and blah, 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 blah. I stand by what I said and...
Wow,
da-da-da.
so he spoke like someone who was just exposed as being a complete opportunist, because he is one.
To some degree. I do think he actually wants to do the things he says he's going to do. And I do think that he is at least cogent of the pressure from the party that he's under.
Yeah.
And so he's willing to sort of follow through on those things.
Yeah, except when it comes to Israel.
Well, to be fair, that was not... I mean, look, the membership of the party generally has a different view on Israel than the liberals or conservatives. But to be fair, I don't think it's really much of a settled issue even within the party.
And it's the kind of thing where Canada's foreign policy on the particular subject doesn't even really matter that much anyway. So
Well, it doesn't. I mean, it did... To go back to, say, a progressive conservative back in the day, Diefenbaker radically changed Canada's policy when he went against apartheid South Africa.
Right.
And that was a huge change. And he basically did it just because it was like, I personally think this should be what we should do. And he sort of started that movement in the Commonwealth. I mean, it wasn't... it didn't really do much at the time, but the point being is, like, you can actually have an impact. You can have a positive impact by, even if people don't necessarily need your support.
Yeah, well, just like Stephen Harper did with Benjamin Netanyahu when Obama turned his back on Israel. Well, not turned his back on, but, criticized.
Mildly
publicly.
criticized,
Yeah.
the worst aspect. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, etc.
It's a mess, and as far as I'm concerned, I don't think he should have forced the candidate who posted something about that. I think it said that they
NDP
considered
prevented one of the candidates from running because
Yeah.
they were like pro-Palestinian.
Yeah, well, it wasn't just pro-Palestinian. Their argument was that I believe she said that actions by the Israeli government, and I don't even think it was clear what they were referring to, but it doesn't really matter, were war crimes.
Right.
Now, the argument from the leadership of the party is not that we've changed our position on Israel and we think that they're, the whole two-state thing and dividing up the country and like having nation states for both Palestinians and Israelis. That's the official position of the NDP. I think still. I hope so. But that their argument was that to call actions by Israel war crimes is just sort of beyond the pale and or inaccurate.
Right. Well, I would respectfully disagree with
Well,
that.
sure,
but-
especially when it's not clear what's even being referred to. It would be... I mean, you could argue it was indelicate, but so what? Where the NDP is a party that has all sorts of people who disagree on all sorts of things.
Well, yeah, I mean, Mulcair is...
And that's how I would have solved it. It would have been a simple matter. It's like, I don't agree. He could have said, I completely disagree with that position. I will, if a vote happens and this occurs, I will demand certain things. But like you can essentially just say, look, this is a matter that is of dispute within the party, and we don't all agree on everything, nor do we have to.
Right.
Yeah,
that's true.
especially when you're talking about fighting against a party that is known for absolutely no dissent.
Well, speaking of which, that kind of goes into how the Conservatives have completely locked down all of their public events. You have to get like approval for asking a question. They all have to be vetted, and only specific people are allowed to them. And they're basically just like cardboard cutout, like old Western style. Like there's no actual like back of the building.
Well, sure. I actually shook Tom Mulcair's hand once.
Yeah, as did I.
Yeah, it was really not all that impressive, but it happened. And
We
I was
can
there.
shake, eh?
I don't know. I didn't really I didn't notice. It was fine. Middle of the road.
Nothing special.
Nothing special.
Just an average handshake.
Good enough. Thomas Mulcair. Good enough. Anyway, it's interesting with them. I mean, they have now. To be fair, the Conservatives have eased the restrictions they have. You can now take photographs.
Oh, what?
And you can actually tweet about it afterwards.
Afterwards.
Yes, you can.
How did they even enforce that before?
I don't know. They took away everyone's cell phones and took them into a poorly lit
Dark
concrete
room.
box, and then there was a veil, and then a shadow that vaguely looked like Stephen Harper would walk into the room, and then a recording of a speech that he had prepared earlier would play, and then applause would play over the recording. And then the shadow would leave, and then you would all be forcibly removed from the premises. I don't know. I don't even know what the point is. I mean, the reason you have rallies is two things. One, to get people who are curious about what you actually have to say to come and see it, right? To go there and be interested, and also through the media to just get some free, publicity. And also to get the people who are already NDPers or conservatives or whatever to go there and kind of be invigorated and interested and sign up for the volunteering and all that sort of stuff. With these rallies, well, I don't even know if they would be appropriate to call them rallies. With these closed events, these prepared speeches that Stephen Harper is doing, I don't see the point, because it doesn't seem like there's really much interaction for anyone to be involved in.
Well, yeah, I think the Conservatives are having a completely different... They're on a different trip here. They don't want to have rallies to, build, momentum or whatever. They just want to have rallies to show, be on camera, be like, hey, there are a group of people here that support us.
Because
Look,
that's what you do when you're running a campaign?
Yeah.
To show life?
To show that that groups of people will listen to what you have to say because you're important.
It's a Potemkin campaign.
Yeah, look at them. See, they like him. They're clapping. Yeah. Vote for this guy. He's good. Yeah, that's it.
And then we're done. Yeah, it's pretty. I can't understand it really. It's almost baffling to me, and it's not like the other candidates are. Stephen Harper is not exactly charismatic as far as I'm concerned, but it's not like the other candidates are astounding wizards, when they're in front of a podium. Trudeau is surprisingly bad at times. He's not always terrible, but he tends to not... He's not like the wizard of speech that he was presented as when he was originally running for leader.
Well, I think he takes a lot from his last name, and it's not always he big shoes to fill. Big
shoes to fill. They've said that every time. Every time when they went from Jean Chrétien to Paul Martin to whoever was after that,
Stéphane Dion,
and then after that, and then
Ignatieff.
Chrétien, he wasn't really a great prime minister. Anyone can do better than him. And it's like, oh, Paul Martin was kind of crap. Anyone can achieve that. And Stéphane Dion, he was terrible. So Ignatieff, and then Ignatieff just disappeared into the ether.
Yeah.
And then a series of interim leaders between then and now, and like I said, it's not like Thomas Mulcair is really a great speaker either. He does have a really annoying tendency of repeating the same pseudo personal patter in every single speech.
Well, Thomas Mulcair, I don't think is the greatest representative of, say, the NDP's roots and rank and file.
No.
He was definitely, I hate to say it, but I did think he was the best choice when, during the leadership campaign.
Well, it was him or Brian Topp, right? And Brian Topp was right-wing too. But he was more of a, he rose up the ranks through sort of the campaign side of things.
I didn't think he would be a particularly great politician. He was the party, president or something like that before.
Yeah, he went to that sort of stuff.
He was a backroom kind of guy, but... no, I mean, Thomas Mulcair was sort of the obvious choice in terms of, this person has to be a parliamentarian.
He has to speak French?
Speak French, yeah. But nevertheless,
We've got him now, and that's not great, and he is, we're kind of beating around the bush here, he is a right-wing candidate for the party.
In the context of the NDP, sure. No,
oh, yeah.
I mean, he's definitely left wing of Harper, right?
And I think
probably
overall
Trudeau,
he might
but-
even be left wing compared to most of the prime ministers the country's had overall.
Yeah, I think so.
I think he'll do. I think he'll do better. The problem, of course, with this for us as socialists is that the limitations of his outlook on what social democracy is, because he does identify as a social democrat now.
Yeah.
Right. So he has at least adopted the language, at the
Yeah.
very least. And
With
some
the exception of the word socialism, which they expunged from the Constitution.
Well, whatever. I mean, the fact of the matter is most of the people who are members of the NDP aren't socialists. All right?
Yeah, they're usually social democrats.
Social
yeah.
Democrats is usually how they identify. I have no problem with the party accurately describing itself.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah, that's fair.
fine. I don't agree with abandoning socialism because as a socialist, I think it is the correct way forward. But, ultimately, this does come down to how do we actually describe ourselves and to be conscious and obvious about ourselves. But as far as Tom Mulcair goes, I don't think he has the kind of perspective on certain things that as a social democrat, or at least as he says, and as a former liberal, he kind of is still sort of treating a lot of politics as simply a matter of like the will or personal choice of the leadership or the parties involved.
Yeah, like policy decisions. It's not structural economic problems that need to be addressed. It's just like laws that need to be
Stephen
passed.
Harper is not either smart enough or doesn't have the vision required for making our country great.
Yeah.
And I do, and our party does, that's sort of essentially what Tom Mulcair's line is.
Yeah.
And that because of that, we'll be able to do things like balance the budget and bring in, child care and all this other stuff. And some of them, like balancing the budget, are like bizarre to some degree.
Yeah, I don't think there's a single NDP card-carrying member that gives anything that resembles a shit about balancing a budget.
You have to balance
necessarily.
budgets over the long term
Over the
because
long term,
that's just
yeah.
what you do. And it's true that historically NDP governments have been better at balancing budgets than most other parties.
Well, yeah, that's the irony of it all.
Well, that's
anyways.
fine, but the point being is you can't just say we're going to balance the budget and make that your focus because ultimately you have to actually address real problems. And as the Socialist Caucus of the NDP said, the only way he's going to be able to balance the budget is by aggressively taxing corporations.
Right.
Right? And that's fine, and I'm perfectly happy for him to do that. But the problem is if he sees that as one step too far, then he has problems.
Well, he has come out to say that he wants to tax corporations at a higher rate.
Oh, yeah.
But I think he backtracked a little bit and said, oh, well, maybe not as much as I said before. Maybe that was too high. And then here we have Justin Trudeau, who's saying that he will purposefully go and run a deficit for 3 years for a massive infrastructure program, which I don't think is a bad idea. But it's just funny that the Liberal is saying that and not the NDPer.
Well, firstly, I don't actually believe him.
No, of course not.
Because A, you don't just come up with a $60 billion infrastructure program on the fly and actually intend to do it.
Right.
It seems like one of those things where maybe he just looked at things and was like, well, how much money would it take to do a bunch of different things? And that's $60 billion. Well, okay, great. And it doesn't... there's things that need to be fixed. There's stuff that needs to be done, certainly. But why not just say those things? Why not just say this is exactly what we're going to do? I mean, $60 billion in quote infrastructure can mean anything.
Well, yeah, that's why it's the perfect thing to say during an election.
Yeah, and that's why I'm skeptical as to whether or not it will actually end up meaning much. And to be fair, I think most people, most of the electorate is as well, since they're still not doing too well in the polls, generally.
Yeah, it does seem like a bit of a... I mean, I know we still have quite a bit of time left before the actual election is, but with him floundering in the polls, it's kind of seems like a bit of a vote grabber, kind of a...
Yeah, and a lot of people, similar to Mulcair's sort of declaration of balanced budgets, it seems like a kind of a vote grabber.
Yeah.
Like, it's just something he's just said. Like, all of a sudden, we're now going to commit ourselves to balanced budgets. Why? I don't know, because we can do it. I mean, you could say that. You could say, our plan is to balance the budget within the money we're going to be bringing in and the projects we're planning on doing. We think, on the basis of that, we can balance the budget, but that they be, given economics being what it is, there can be things that might happen that will change that.
You know, I think I kind of get Mulcair's angle, though, because he spent a lot of the debate and the campaign criticizing Harper on, you know, saying what a great economic wizard he is while simultaneously running deficits, right? And also considering that the NDP has a better record on average of actually doing that and balancing budgets and being more economically responsible, that on the basis of those two things, he can say, hey, we're going to balance the budget.
And that's
it's just more likely that we're going to do that because based on our, you know, history as a party and our policies, and also just sort of living up to the criticism that he's lodged against Harper, saying, well, you know, if you keep saying Harper runs deficits, well, are you just going to do the same thing, right? So he's sort of almost painted himself into a corner where he has to say that, even though it doesn't.
I don't know. I mean, it didn't seem like anyone was really that critical of the NDP as far as economics goes. It seemed to be that the tide was just turning against the Conservatives, just sort of on its own.
Well, no, I mean, now you see both the Conservatives and the Liberals have criticized the NDP for this gap in, you know, tens of billions of dollars of how they're actually going to pay for their promises, which is the same kind of shit that they lodge against the NDP in every election ever. And that's just the sort of default go-to criticism that anyone would use against any social democratic party. But it's funny that they are resorting to that at this point, where it's almost like that's the criticism you lodge at the NDP if you have nothing better to say. That's just like the go-to like refrain for it.
There won't be enough money.
Yeah, it's like you can't pay for all this. You know, austerity is the only answer.
Yeah, well, there's more. I mean, well, yeah. I mean, and that's big stuff. Economics is a huge issue, but I think that it is going to matter to people. But there's been a whole lot of smaller stuff that's hurt the Conservative Party's credibility with a lot of people.
Even their own party members, like Mike Duffy.
The Dole trial there. I don't think it's... I don't know. Once again, I don't know exactly what Stephen Harper was actually thinking he was going to accomplish by stretching this out for so long.
Well, in retrospect, it kind of seems almost like a desperate last-ditch maneuver, unless he has some secret thing up his sleeve, which I kind of, at this point, doubt that he does.
They got into this mess because someone, possibly the Prime Minister, we don't really know because everyone involved just says no, and everyone who's not involved says yes, that the Prime Minister knew, right?
Right.
So, if that's the case, if the Prime Minister knew, then all of this, then this whole decision process, the whole decision process behind this was was to resolve the Duffy issue quickly and quietly and out of the public eye.
Right.
And that attempt is exactly what has now exploded in their face.
Right.
Or it was just a stupid member of the PMO who was trying to help out a good friend, which seems really strange because it's $90,000. I don't...
That you can't just write a check.
Look, I'm sorry,
that.
Ben, but I wouldn't just give you $90,000 if I thought you had broken the rules.
Even if you had it.
Yeah. Well, maybe, but even then, I'd be like, you broke the rules, right? Like you weren't actually following the rules of your job. It's not like it's not like a bus fell on you or something. You broke the rules. You weren't doing the right things.
You were wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's reeks of suspicion, and it's funny because it's the worst time for this to happen for Harper because at this point even the smallest little fraction of a few voters can make a difference, a couple percentage points.
Well, the polls that were putting it I think undecided voters, it was not a huge percentage, but it was around a third of people thought more negatively of the Conservatives because of this. I mean, there's been a few sort of polls on this. Nothing major, but what it has essentially said is that, yes, there is some amount of people who will not be voting Conservative this election because of this particular issue.
And there was a few more just because of that angry old man that ranted to the television cameras.
Oh my God! Why? What? Is that it? Is it? And here's the worst part: we get more out of we've got more out of him than we have out of the average conservative candidate.
Yeah, and that's probably exactly what he said was what the Conservatives candidates would end up saying.
Blah, 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 it doesn't matter. It's not real. Mike Duffy, fuck you. Blah, 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 blah. It's like the Conservative Party's heart and soul right there. Oh, I could just kiss you. Honesty like that sense of gravitas. That's exactly what millions of Canadians have been wanting from the government, and it's frustrating because so many people. One of the major problems so many people seem to have with the government is how they won't tell people what they're doing.
Yeah.
They don't want to talk to anyone, and it is so frustrating.
Yeah.
When, scientists can't talk to anybody, when the government doesn't want to say anything, when people just it's a media blackout as far as everyone's concerned.
It's obvious they're not reading. They're reading from a script.
Yeah,
they won't answer questions.
Just when you can get these kind of like glimmers of honesty, even when it's insulting and like childish, it's just it actually is more enjoyable. That man humanized the Conservative Party. He did. He showed that the Conservative Party is made up of real people and not robots. Old cranky men, but not robots.
Yeah. Who's running for the Conservatives? Right, cranky old men and whiny young men.
Yeah, that was the other one. The people who just seem to not have a very high opinion of women for the most part.
Moving on.
The whole issue with scientists has also been one of those minor things that's really been kind of just sort of a stone around the Conservative Party's neck.
Yeah.
Really, overall. Does it really... Here's the thing. The Conservative Party obviously doesn't want scientists talking about global warming, right? They don't. They don't want them talking about it.
They don't want them doing a lot of other things, too.
No, but there seems to be like a specific thing about that, I think. But at the same time, who gives a shit? Like, what kind of person would say, oh yeah, global warming's real, I heard it from a scientist, and so I'm not going to vote Conservative now? It's not like there's a lot of confusion there already. It's not like people think, oh, well, the Conservative Party, obviously, they think global warming's real. And, the fact that I haven't heard it from scientists that it's actually a big deal, who cares? Whatever, I'll just vote Conservative anyway. Do they really think that people are going to be turned off of their policies because of that?
It's a control thing. Because Harper wants the scientific output of Canada to go towards industry. When Harper got into power, he completely changed the direction of the research that scientists on the federal payroll do. Because before it was just things like, I don't know, cancer research and experiments that would just put
medical
science
research,
forward.
research towards all sorts of
no,
weird things.
that doesn't matter. The scientists, they should be helping industry make money.
Develop new alloys and chemicals for separating other chemicals apart.
Yeah, so the Conservatives are horrible for science, where they've turned this public body into just an organ for churning out useful things for corporations. So it's like subsidizing the private sector. It's ridiculous.
Well, that is also why I think that conservative and liberal governments do have such a difficult time with balancing their budgets. I mean, at the end of the day, it is expensive to keep capitalism going. Sometimes, at least. But of course, that's sort of the big issue. More personally for you,
Go on.
Well, you told me you took a poll recently online. Online poll, and we know how accurate those are.
Yeah.
Now, could you tell me about it more? I want to hear it again.
I hate you, Mac. So I think it was like vote.ca or something. It was a poll that asked you a bunch of questions about policy and put you, which party you would most likely vote for.
Took your credit card information, personal details onto it.
Social insurance number. Yeah,
was it vote.ca or was it vote.su or .biz?
I don't know, one of those, something like that. Yeah.
LR.
So they put me as a fucking Green Party supporter, and I was so fucking mad. Because I took for the most part, the most extreme position on a lot of issues, right? It's like, I strongly disagree with this, I strongly agree with this, And then when it asked me about, like, oh, do you like the NDP? Do you like the Greens? Who do you trust more? Blah, blah, blah. I was like, Elizabeth May sucks. I like Thomas Mulcair. And they still put me as a Green Party
you think that would count for more,
for
right?
something, yeah.
You're like, who will you vote for in the next election? NDP.
I don't...
Well, you're a Green Party candidate.
Yeah,
what?
I mean, I don't actually think she sucks. She's okay, but...
But you had to make a point. You had to send a message.
Yeah. And nevertheless, and, you know, I compared some of the answers, and I was like, well, maybe the Green Party does have a,
Maybe that's
more...
the party for you, Ben.
Maybe
this whole
you can
time
shut your goddamn mouth.
Your venomous hatred of the Green Party. Maybe this is all it's all coming together now. It makes sense. You really
That I am actually just secretly one of
them. This whole
them.
time you've been a Green
No,
Party.
No, I'm not.
Not like this.
I hate the Green Party. I don't hate them. I strongly dislike them.
I don't hate them. They're fine. They're just unnatural. That's all. And I'm not one of them.
I find them to be disingenuous. Like, oh, we're not left wing or right wing, except we're gonna say we're left wing when it's convenient, and we're
they're
also
left wing when it matters, and they're not anything when it also matters.
Well, Elizabeth May did say that she was fiscally conservative, but also didn't want to make a big deal about saying that. And that's one of the chief
That
reasons...
seems like one of those things when you say fiscally conservative, it almost doesn't quite make sense to me, because I'm like, well, does that mean you want to spend less or do you want to tax more? Because it kind of ends up being one or the other, and fiscally conservative doesn't mean either.
Well, I think fiscally conservative means that you are more like a right wing.
Yeah, I understand, but that's usually the way that it ends up being. Conservative in the sense of I have a very limited view of what we should do, and that inevitably means fewer things to be funded.
Right.
And from the Green Party's platform, that is sort of the case. That they have a more limited view of they have a more radical, limited view of what the government should actually be doing. Obviously, when it comes to the environment, they kind of have a special case for the environment, but. To be fair, none of that really matters because the Green Party's platform is irrelevant, as evidenced by their most recent little debacle with their divorce policy, which I can't quite understand what happened. Well, no one seems to know what happened, including the Green Party.
Hold on. For those listeners that aren't familiar,
haven't heard of this. And probably haven't because it's not a huge issue. It's just sort of bizarre. Apparently, the Green Party had, as part of its official platform, the desire to get rid of... the current divorce laws, to get rid of no-fault divorce, to return it back to where you had to prove fault on the part of one or both parties in court before you could actually apply for divorce. This was the case until, I think, the 1980s or something, somewhere around there. And it is seen by me, at least, and by most people who call themselves feminists, as a more regressive position to take. And that, combined with very weird... language used in the policy that implies some kind of...
you mean the Green Party's position,
the Green Party's,
not the law?
No, not the law. The Green Party's policy statement on their desire to change divorce laws
was regressive.
Suggests some ulterior motives that, at least, I think there was the Toronto Metro associated with men's rights movement.
Right. So basically the men's rights movement were able to push their position in the Green Party.
Now, to be fair, I mean, no one is a one-issue human being.
Yeah.
There's probably plenty of people who are Green Party members who agree with a lot of the men's rights movement issues, and divorce law is one of those things that they care about quite a bit. And so, sure, there's probably overlap there. But what confused me about it was what the Green Party did later, where Elizabeth May essentially disavowed herself and the party of this policy that somehow ended up in their overall policy statement, and they themselves don't seem to know how, and they ended up just essentially erasing all of the contentious aspects of their legislation and have just left in the part, or not legislation, their policy statement, that says that they don't think the current divorce laws are appropriate.
Okay. So
and not really clear about what they mean anymore or what they want to change.
Okay, so just to recap, the Green Party, Elizabeth May, I guess, didn't know about this part of their own policy.
Well, who knows? And who cares? Because the Green Party apparently doesn't have to follow its own policy.
Right. Well, yeah, that's kind of funny in its own right. But I guess the Greens really are the miscellaneous party if they're the party that is able, at some point at least, to put men's rights issue.
Well, as you said, I mean,
platform.
they do characterize themselves when convenient as a progressive party, and certainly a lot of their supporters see them as that. And the problem with this was that they were shown, at least on this particular issue, to not be progressive, but actually regressive. And as a consequence of that exposure, instead of admitting this fact or supporting it through some kind of reasoned argument, or even just saying, for Elizabeth May, for instance, to just say, that's not personally what I think is appropriate, they butchered their own policy and then essentially disavowed it as relevant to this whole thing, which is exactly the kind of ham-handed electioneering and campaigning and hypocritical politicking that the Green Party generally criticizes every other party for.
Yeah, we're different. We don't do that kind of thing. We're not left wing or right wing.
Yeah.
We just have smart policy. except
All
in
we
this
care
one
about,
case.
all we care about, is that our MPs are able to freely decide, on their own what they want to believe. No party whips, no party policy forcing people to do things that they don't actually believe in. But on a practical level, what that means is that Elizabeth May essentially is the dictator of the Green Party when it comes to policy.
Because she's the only representative.
Yeah, and as long as she or whatever handful of Green Party members happen to get elected in the next election, they get to decide on their own what actually happens.
What is the actual vote that the Green Party
so
members put
the
forward?
membership, thousands of Green Party members can say whatever they want, but the second it becomes inconvenient for any of the people running in campaigns or in Parliament, they can just jettison whatever aspects of it they don't like.
Right, or just not vote for it because they don't
Yeah.
personally agree with it.
And that's the part I actually find more objectionable. I don't really care that the Green Party wants to change the divorce laws. I think that's really a weird, obscure issue that seems a bit... honestly, as someone who's not married and not really involved, I don't know anyone who really is, so I don't care, and it's not an issue for me, and I don't have kids, and so on. But, maybe I'd care more if I did. But as it stands, it's an odd issue for me to sort of make into something, but it does, I think, kind of show that the Green Party is not entirely consistent when it comes to their own sort of stated aims.
Right, to not be the traditional party
Yeah.
and not be hypocritical and blah blah blah.
To be a party of principle, to be a party that goes to Parliament and fights for those issues that matter to people, and yet maybe not, because this is one of those cases. This is and the Green Party hasn't really been criticized on a lot of these kinds of issues because they're not generally seen as a huge deal. But when push comes to shove, apparently the policy can be jettisoned for the sake of the campaign.
Right, which I honestly don't find surprising in the slightest. And I think that kind of exposes the flaws in the Green Party's position, where they say, oh, we're not a traditional party, we're not left-wing or right-wing, we're something different, and yet they behave exactly the same way when faced with an issue.
Yeah, if their policies are so easy to get rid of, what does that say to the things they just promise during the election?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, what does the Green Party's platform even matter at all if the members or the actual MPs don't have to abide by it?
Well, who knows? I mean, in principle, they all agree that the environment's good and they want to protect it. But in practice, that can mean any number of things. The Conservative Party says they want to protect the environment. The Liberal, everybody wants to protect the environment. It's just a buzzword. It doesn't mean anything unless you start talking about, practical ways in which to do that. And unfortunately, when that means policy, and policy, for the Green Party at least, can just be ignored. The same thing does happen with the NDPs and Liberals, and they're all sort of throwing promises out at each other now anyway.
Right, because it's an election and that's what happens.
Yeah, and all sorts of things have been promised, with Trudeau promising all sorts of infrastructure funding, and the NDP promising... Well, they've been promising... their positions have been a bit more long-term, I guess. Child care, and... it does, in many cases, just come down to trust when it comes down to practical issues of who to vote for.
Yeah.
And
well, like how Stephen Harper recently put through one of the like a child allowance, like if you have a kid, you got like $400 in the mail or something like that.
Yeah.
And that just so happened to happen shortly after an election was called. And as it turns out, not all Canadians are that fucking gullible and actually realize that, hey, this is really conveniently timed for you, and this actually reeks of just vote buying. So
Yeah, well, it's a problem when you end up with a party that's out of touch and just. I don't want to say they have given up, but I mean, you can see just how incompatible the last 4 years have been when it comes to running in another election.
right.
Like, it has trained them to be really bad at running elections.
You mean like putting through things like C-51 and C-54?
Well, C-51, those are like I'm talking. Yeah, those policies and omnibus bills generally have hurt them, and well, even just the Liberals. It's hurt the Liberals probably more. But no, I mean just sort of the whole sort of environment of fear and no dissent and no discussion and no.
Right.
I don't want anyone in front of a camera who I haven't previously allowed and that kind of stuff. Like, that whole attitude has really just hobbled their ability to campaign in any kind of real
Right, because
way.
all of a sudden now they're in a position where, hey, you actually have to talk to other humans.
What happens? You're the conservative candidate for this or that riding, and what do you do? I mean, if a reporter calls you up and says, "We want to do an interview with you on what's your platform, or describe your what you care about," that kind of stuff.
Even if you're an
what do you
incumbent.
do? What do you do? Do you have do you say, well, I'm gonna have to ask the PMO first because that's what we've been told to do pretty much every day for the last 4 years before I talk to reporters. I have to get that permission first. But I mean, and even if you get the permission, you're talking about just making it more and more difficult for people to for conservative candidates to actually interact with the public in any meaningful way. Unless you just decide, and I'm sure some of them have to some degree, just decide to ignore the PMO and just be like, no, I'm just going to talk to the local, newspaper because otherwise I'll lose. I mean, like, if I don't do the job of campaigning, I'll lose my seat, and then no one is helped by that.
Yeah, and their crickety old machine comes like crashing down.
Yeah, I don't know, and I mean, they've done everything they can to keep it all together, but it's it's a monolith, but there seems to be very few moving parts inside.
Yeah, it seems like it's. I mean, I don't want to end up eating my words or taking my foot out of my mouth in October, but it kind of seems like the conservative machine is coming to a slow grinding halt, where his main supporters, Harper's supporters, have abandoned him, and I mean like his cabinet members. They've all taken jobs in the private sector. His hair's all gray now, and he's been in power for a long time, and he's bad in the polls.
There's no. I mean, Rob Ford is the only person, or was his brother that was suggesting he could run for leader?
Oh, Doug Ford, yeah.
Doug Ford, yeah.
And by the way, that angry old man that yelled at the cameras was wearing a Doug Ford button on his...
Classic.
Yeah.
Classic. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear.
Hey, speaking...
What a depth of leadership the Conservative Party has, eh?
Speaking of arrogant, angry old men, Donald Trump's doing pretty well, hey?
Now there's the proxy. Now here's the thing, eh? It was on the Daily Show and all sorts of places. They were making fun of Canada and Toronto for having Rob Ford as mayor. Right. Well, screw you. You can eat humble pie now. Now that you've got Donald Trump as the legitimate candidate for the Republican Party. Well, I don't care. Being mayor of Toronto is nothing compared to having Donald Trump as the front runner for who knows how long he can keep this up.
Yeah, so the Republican movement in the United States is kind of eating its own words, where they've spent the last, 20 years encouraging subtle racism and discrimination against minorities and hate towards, Mexicans and foreigners, and all of a sudden you have a candidate that espouses and embodies all of that, and now all of a sudden he's a liability. Well, you
It-
reap what you sow.
Yeah, here's the disturbing thing though. Is he though? Is he a liability? Do you think that Donald Trump does better or would do better or worse as a presidential candidate than say Jeb Bush?
Well, Jeb Bush seems more like a responsible, level-headed man, and as such, I think that would almost disadvantage him
Yeah.
in terms of whether or not your average rank-and-file Republican voter would actually vote for him.
What if Donald Trump is the Republican version of Barack Obama? He embodies the frustration within his party. He embodies the frustration of many Americans, not just not from like a left wing standpoint, but he's a right wing populist, right?
Yeah.
He's saying, all those bastards, all those people that and deep down in your heart have been the reason that we've been failing this whole time, that problems have been abounding. That's the problem, and I'm against it, and I'm not going to be a part of the establishment. I'm not going to take their money. I'm not interested in what they have to say. I'm my own man. All that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing. If Donald Trump starts coming out with can we do it speeches, I think he has at this point a chance of actually being the candidate.
Yeah, well, it's funny because he's alienating himself from the Republican Party brass, but he's also emboldening himself amongst the actual average Republican voter who, don't mind if you say inflammatory things about women or minorities.
And he has enough money to maybe not outspend potential opponents, but at least constantly stay in the race the whole time.
Well, yeah, that's the interesting thing, because all the other Republican candidates and candidates in general have spent their entire careers fostering and building relationships with financiers and donors, and you can't say stupid shit when you have to depend on other people's money. But this man has an basically infinite amount of money that he can spend and just say whatever the hell he wants because he's financing his own campaign.
Yeah, he's a billionaire ? He has money, we assume.
Yeah.
Who knows? But whatever, it doesn't matter. He has apparently enough money to try to be president. It's like Citizen Kane, but like real life. Like a billionaire asshole decides, I'm gonna fix everything. You people all need to love me. And then Donald Trump just comes along and it's like, all right. I don't know. He seems so unbelievably cartoonish, though. It almost just it hurts to think of a world in which he's even gotten this far.
And that's
without
the one
just
that
being like slapped right down into like the single digits.
That's the world that we actually live in.
Yeah, that's the problem. I mean, I was looking at him, and I've actually made a bet, $5, mind you, not a huge bet, but I've made a bet that the candidates that will actually be running will be Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton.
Right.
And I don't feel so good about those odds right now.
Well, I mean, I don't actually want Hillary Clinton to win.
No, I didn't.
want Bernie Sanders to win. I don't think he's going to, although I think he has a decent shot at it if he keeps up his momentum.
I don't know. I think it's still a lot of online sort of internet delusions of grandeur.
Yeah.
For a lot of people.
Yeah, I think so, because his best support polling is like 20-some%, and Hillary is like 40%.
And every single one of the polls were like people are just raving about him. He's in first place, or he's catching up to Hillary Clinton. It's always some local state poll in some particular
New Hampshire,
region.
Iowa, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like that's not important. I mean, if you want to,
Dude, isn't it important in like the way they do their
barely? It's so screwed up. We could do a whole episode on the Electoral College and every single thing that's wrong with it. People have probably written books, long 700-page books about what's wrong with the American political system. There's no end to it.
Well, 700 pages seems like it would just be like the preamble.
Yeah, well, volume 1.
Well, anyway, we don't live there, and maybe...
But it is nice to get some perspective on occasion. Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, I think they both represent kind of alternate versions of the same coin, similar to in Britain right now. What we're seeing in Canada, in the United States, in Britain, are social democrats, left-wingers, socialists, kind of suddenly finding themselves with a lot of support. There's been a lot of sort of kind of a gut reaction to capitalism and what's been going on lately. Ever since 2008, this has been sort of building up. And I think that we're starting to see kind of on an international scale a shift in people's priorities and desires. And in the case of Canada, that looks like it's going to end up with some form of an NDP government. Where we go from there, we'll have to see. In the case of the United States, it looks like right now the odds are that it will end up with a minority faction within the Democratic Party that's supporting a candidate who considers himself to be a socialist.
Yeah.
And in the case of Britain, it looks like they're going to have a leader who also considers himself to be a socialist.
Yeah.
And from there, who knows, maybe the Labour Party will actually get back into power again on the basis of actually doing what people want.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's interesting to see changes happening in a lot of different countries. And
I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it's all connected, and that's what ultimately is what's so interesting about all these issues.